For 2.9, we're talking about what happens when we have parallel lines. So the first one we need to talk about is what happens when two lines aren't parallel. And one way to describe two lines that are not parallel are called skew lines. And skew lines are lines that are drawn, it says they cannot lie in the same plane and never intersect. So what that means is that if I drew this x and y axis, and I drew this x and y axis, and then I drew a line on the first one and drew a line on the second one, it's not going to matter what direction those lines are going. They're never going to intersect because they're not drawn on the same x and y axis. In order for them to actually intersect, they have to be coplanar, which is what you learned last time. So if they're skew lines, that means that they are not coplanar. That's another way of saying that. Alright, so two lines that are parallel, so two lines that are coplanar and never intersect. The symbol for parallel looks like this. It's like two L's drawn beside each other. So parallel lines would be if we had one x and y axis, and we had two lines on there that never intersected. They would be parallel. So these are parallel. And again, these up here are skew lines. And these are skew because they're in different planes. These are parallel because they're in the same plane. So there's a statement that says, through a given point, how many lines exist that are parallel to a given line? So that's saying, what that's telling you is that if you had a line, and you had a point that wasn't on that line, how many lines can go through that and be parallel? Well, I'm going to draw some lines in there. You don't have to draw them. So if I drew this pink line in there, it's not going to be parallel. If I drew this blue line in there, it's kind of close to parallel, but not quite. It's a little bit crooked. If I drew this green line in there, clearly that is not parallel. So the rule says that if you have a line and a point not on that line, so here's my point not on that line, there is exactly one line that can go through that point that is parallel. There's no other line that can go through it because any other line is going to have a different slope and it's going to intersect it. Alright, so if we have if we have a set of parallel lines, so I just want you to look at this picture for now. So these two lines are parallel. This one and this one are parallel. And then you have this line that cuts through it. This line right here, by the way, is called the transverse axis. Transverse axis. Okay? What happens when that line cuts through it is it basically creates 8 angles. So there's 1, you don't have to mark these, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those are my 8 angles that are created. Well, if you look really closely, what you should notice is that these 4 angles here at the bottom look identical to these 4 angles here at the top. And that's because they are. And what I mean by that is that this angle and this angle are the same. And this angle and this angle are the same. And this one and this one are the same. And this one and this one are the same. And when you have this, what you have is what we call corresponding angles. So you're supposed to mark corresponding angles. Well, corresponding angles, what that means is they're in the same place. So for example, they're both in the top left. They're both in the bottom right, something like that. But on different lines. So in this picture over here, I'm going to mark a pair of corresponding angles. This angle and this angle would be considered corresponding. So they're the exact same angle, they're just in two different places. And corresponding angle measurements are always congruent. They're always congruent. So these two that are drawn in green are corresponding. I'm also going to label the next pair that I'm going to label in pink. They're congruent. I'm going to label the next ones in blue. These two are congruent. And I'm going to label the last ones in purple. And these two are also congruent. So it's literally, if you notice, the colors are the exact same all the way around. So those are how we get what we call corresponding angles. So it says to find the missing angle measures for X and Y. Well, they told me that this angle was 70, which means that this angle must also be 70 because they are the exact same angle. And they told me this angle at the bottom, on the bottom half, the top left one was 110. So the top left one on the other side is also going to be 110. So these are corresponding angles. All right, the next type of angle we're going to talk about is what we call alternate interior angles. Okay? Alternate means they're on opposite sides. Interior means that they are inside. So when we're talking about inside, what they're saying is that they're in between the two parallel lines. So if you look at these two parallel lines, there's four angles that are created on the inside. And when they talk about alternate interior, they mean opposite ones. So this angle and this angle would be considered alternate interior angles. And alternate interior angles are also congruent. Alternate interior angles are also congruent. So the two that I've labeled in pink are congruent, and the two that I've labeled in green are congruent. If you want different colored markers, make sure you ask someone for them. They're around, I promise. So we're going to move on to the next page. It says to find the missing angle measure, X. Well, I have 60. X is the one I want. Okay, and I'm noticing they're on opposite sides, and they're in between these two lines, so these are alternate interior angles. So if one of them is 60, the other one is 60. Our next word is consecutive interior angles. Well, again, interior, like before, means in between these two blue lines. I'm going to color them blue. So interior means inside. The word consecutive means the same side. They're next to each other. They're in a row. So my consecutive interior angles would be this one and this one. And my other pair would be the ones on the right side. Consecutive interior angles are not congruent. They are supplementary. Supplementary. And the word supplementary, if you'll think back a couple lessons ago, means that they add up to 180 degrees. They add up to 180 degrees. So, in this picture they give you on page 14, I first want you to write in 121 down here in the top left on the bottom half. And the reason I know that it's 121 is because the 121 here and this 121 we just wrote in are going to be corresponding angles. So we're looking for X. Well, I noticed that 121 and X are on the same side, and they're in between my two parallel lines, so that means that 121 plus X equals 180. So to solve for x, that means I'm going to subtract 121 from both sides. And I get that x equals 59. So x would be 59 degrees. All right, there is a diagram that I want you to draw. I don't care where you draw it, somewhere in this section, because this will help you tremendously. Yes, you need to draw this. This is not optional. You're going to draw two parallel lines, and you're going to draw a transverse axis. So you're going to draw two parallel lines, and then you're going to draw a transverse axis. Here's the deal. You have two options for your angle measures. Your angles are either option A, they're equal. Option B, they're supplementary. And the way it works is there's really two angle measures that every single one of these is going to be. And I'm going to label them with the number 1s and the number 2. If I call this angle 1, then this is also angle 1, because these two angles are vertical angles. This is also angle 1 for two reasons. Number 1, this one and this one are what we call corresponding angles. Reason 2 is that this one and this one are alternate interior. Again, they're the same thing. And if this is 1, then this is 1. So in other words, these four angles all have the exact same measure. Every single time, those four angles will have the exact same measure. My second angle measure is all the others. These four angles that I've labeled 2 all have the exact same measure. And the great thing is that angles 1 and angle 2 add up to 180. So 4 of them are equal, the other 4 are equal, and if you add any one of each of those, then you get 180. That's the way it's always going to work. Looking at the checkup. The way I'm going to do this one is I'm actually going to work out 1 through 4, and you will be responsible for the rest of the problems on this page. So rather than actually doing them one at a time, I'm going to zoom in and I'm just going to start labeling everything I know. So they've given me 25. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to label everything that I know is 25. Well, I know this angle is 25 because they're vertical angles. And then that means this one is 25 and this one is 25. To find my other angle, I know that 25 plus x has to add up to 180. So I'm going to subtract 25 from both sides. And I get that x equals 155. So my second angle measure here is 155 degrees. So the top right's 155. The bottom left is 155. The top right is 155. And the bottom left is 155. So notice, every single one of these angles in this picture, all 8 of them is one of two measures. It's either 25 or 155. Where I got that is 25 plus 155 is 180. So that's where the two numbers came from. And then you just have to figure out what does each angle measure. And a lot of times it's common sense. Like if you look at this angle right here, this angle is really small. It cannot be 155 degrees because that's really big. And this angle is really small. They look like they're the same size, so they're both 25. Now answering our questions. Question 1 says to find W. Well, we figured out W was 25. Question 2 says find X. We figured out that was 155. Question 3 says find Y. We figured out Y was also 155. And then the last one says to find Z. And Z was also 155. So that's my answer. So you're going to be responsible for 5 through 10. You're going to have to do all of those. On 5 through 7, I will help you out a little bit. So it kind of looks weird because our parallel lines aren't flat like we're used to. So I'm actually going to turn it this direction. So my parallel lines are side by side. And I'm going to help you by finding this angle here. Well, we know that these two angles, if they're next to each other, they add up to 180. Those are called a linear pair. We talked about that a long time ago. And we also know that there's only 1 and 2 degree measures. They're either equal or they add up to 180. So I'm going to say that x plus 40 equals 180. I'm going to subtract 40 from both sides, and I get x equals 140. So this angle here is 140 degrees. From there, you should be able to fill in every other angle measure on this particular problem.